Okay, so think about this for a second. What if the very core of who you are, your thoughts, your feelings, that little voice inside your head, what if all of that isn't just biology? What if it's actually woven into the fundamental code of the cosmos itself? It sounds like science fiction, I know, but today we're diving headfirst into one of the most mind-bending and, let's be honest, controversial ideas out there, the quantum mind.
All right, before we get too wild, let's start with the biggest mystery of them all, consciousness itself. I mean, we all know our brains are just a bunch of neurons firing, right? It's all electricity and chemistry. But how does that create the feeling of seeing the color red, or the joy of hearing your favorite song? That private inner movie that's playing in your head right now? That gap, right there, is what's famously called the hard problem of consciousness. And believe me, it is so hard that it has pushed some very smart people to look for answers in some, well, pretty strange places.
So let's really dig into this puzzle. What is it about the standard textbook view of the brain that's just not cutting it for some researchers? You know, the traditional story goes something like this. Consciousness just sort of emerges from all the complexity. You've got billions of neurons, trillions of connections, and poof, you get awareness. The brain is basically just a super, super powerful biological computer. And look, that model explains a ton about how we process information. But for some scientists, it just doesn't explain the big thing, the experience. It tells us how the computer works, but not why it feels like something to be that computer. Why do we have this rich inner world at all? And this is where the quantum mind hypothesis crashes the party. Now, it's not just one single theory. It's more like a family of really wild ideas, but they all share this one radical thought. What if all that bizarre stuff from quantum mechanics, things like superposition, where a particle can be in multiple places at once, or entanglement, where two particles are spookily linked across any distance, what if that's not just happening in some distant star or a physics lab? What if it's happening right now, inside your head, as the very basis of your consciousness? Okay, so how on earth could that actually work? I mean, it sounds pretty out there. Let's take a look at the most famous and detailed attempt to actually build one of these quantum theories of the mind. Yeah, the main theory here comes from a really fascinating and, you could say, unlikely duo. On one hand, you've got Sir Roger Penrose, a legit genius, a theoretical physicist who worked side by side with Stephen Hawking, a giant in his field. And on the other hand, you have Stuart Hameroff, an anesthesiologist. I mean, this is a guy whose job is literally to turn consciousness on and off every single day. And together, these two came up with a theory with a very fancy name, orchestrated objective reduction. We're just going to call it ORC-OR. And this quote from Penrose, this really gets to the core of why he went down this path in the first place. He basically looked at the human mind, our creativity, our flashes of insight, our ability to understand deep mathematical truths, and said, there's no way a regular computer can do this. He was convinced our minds are doing something that's fundamentally non-computational, something that can't be broken down into a simple algorithm. So he went looking for a physical process that wasn't like a computer, and that led him straight to the weird world of quantum mechanics. Okay, so that's the why. But what about the how? If the brain really is some kind of quantum computer, well, where's the hardware? Where are the quantum bits? All right, the ORC-OR theory basically works in 3 steps. It's pretty cool. Step 1, these weird quantum computations, these superpositions, they start up inside tiny little structures in our brain's neurons. Step 2, these quantum states start to grow and build on each other, getting more and more complex. Then step 3, and this is the big one. Once they hit a certain point, a critical threshold, they all collapse together into one single definite state. And Penrose and Hameroff's big claim is that that collapse, that is a moment of consciousness, a single distinct beat of pure awareness. So the million-dollar question is, where could a process this delicate possibly happen inside a warm, messy brain? Well, this was Hameroff's big contribution. He pointed to these things called microtubules. They're these tiny little protein cylinders that form the skeleton of our cells. And he argued that their structure, this hollow, crystalline-like tube, was the absolute perfect place to protect and host these tiny quantum computations. Basically, they're the quantum wiring of the brain. I mean, you've got to admit, it's an incredible idea, right? It's so ambitious, so elegant. It literally tries to build a bridge between the physics of the cosmos and the feeling of being alive. But, and this is a huge but, from the moment they proposed it, the theory ran into a massive wall of scientific criticism. And that brings us to the really important question. Does the science actually back this up?
Is there any proof? Is it even physically possible? For the vast majority of physicists and neuroscientists, the answer has been a pretty loud and clear no.
Okay, and here is the number one problem, the absolute deal breaker for most critics. It's a concept called decoherence. See, quantum states are unbelievably fragile. They need to be kept super isolated and cold to survive. But the brain? The brain is the exact opposite. It's warm, it's wet, it's incredibly noisy. The physicist Max Tegmark actually did the math on this, and he calculated that any quantum state inside a microtubule would fall apart or decohere in less than a picosecond. That's a ridiculously short amount of time. And as you can see here, our neurons operate on the scale of milliseconds. The timing is just, it's not even in the same ballpark. It's a completely different universe of time.
And look, the pushback isn't just a friendly disagreement about the math. It's a deep, fundamental rejection of the whole idea. And this quote from the physicist Victor Stenger, wow, it really sums up the attitude from a lot of the mainstream scientific community. To many, this idea isn't just wrong, it's not even science. It's seen as pure speculation, filed away with things that just aren't real.
So we can really boil down all the criticism into three main arguments. First, you've got the huge practical problem we just talked about, decoherence. The brain is just too messy for quantum stuff to survive. Second, there's a big conceptual problem. A lot of scientists and philosophers would ask, do we even need a wild quantum explanation? They argue that consciousness isn't one single magical thing, but just what happens when you have tons of simpler, non-conscious calculations all happening at once in the brain. The idea is we just need to keep studying the brain the classical way, and we'll figure it out eventually. And third, the theory has a bit of a mysticism problem. It often gets lumped in with a lot of unscientific nonsense like quantum healing, and that association just makes serious scientists really, really skeptical.
So, okay, after this whole journey, from this mind-blowing proposal to the pretty harsh reality check, where does that leave the whole idea of a quantum mind?
Well, here's the bottom line. The idea of quantum consciousness is still very much on the fringes of science. It's a fascinating hypothesis, for sure, and there's still a few dedicated researchers working on it, but it just hasn't cleared the massive hurdles, both in theory and in experiment, that it would need to become a mainstream idea. It's one of those beautiful, imaginative theories that really pushes our boundaries, but for right now, that's what it is, speculation. And that, of course, leaves us right back where we started, with that ultimate question, the hard problem of consciousness. It's still completely unsolved. And, while these specific quantum mind theories might not be the answer, they do something really important. They force us to think big. They force us to question everything. And you have to wonder, could Penrose be right in a different way? Maybe the answer isn't in the physics we know now, but in some deeper, more fundamental physics we haven't even discovered yet. And that is a thought that definitely keeps the mystery alive.